think humility and confidence, they complement each other very, very nicely. Somehow, someone else needs to know that you know whatever you're talking about. But humility helps you make that even stronger by saying, I don't know, but I'm going to run some experiments and I'm going to figure it out. Or I'm going to figure out that it's not doable and that we can't do it. And so that on itself even creates more confidence.
Welcome to another episode of Outsider Inc. I'm your host, Ian Hathway. Today's guest is Isaac Saldana, co-founder and former CEO of SendGrid, and now founder and CEO of Joy Labs. SendGrid, which Isaac began in Southern California in 2008, but more formally launched out of Techstars Boulder in 2009, grew into one of Colorado's great startup success stories, powering email for companies like Uber, Spotify, and Airbnb. The company scaled to hundreds of employees, sending tens of billions of emails each month, going public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2017, before ultimately selling to Twilio in a $2 billion acquisition. But Isaac's path to that moment was anything but conventional. Born in the US and raised in Mexico, he returned to California at age 14 without knowing English. By 19, he was married with a family, working 2 jobs, and putting himself through school full-time. His journey wasn't driven by pedigree or privilege, but by grit, persistence, and a willingness to learn what he didn't know. Since SendGrid, Isaac has continued to build. He co-founded Joy Labs, experimented with new ventures in the communications domain like Memo, and today is back in the arena with Laneful, an AI-powered messaging platform designed to reinvent how email and communication infrastructure work at scale. I'm excited to dig into how an introverted engineer grew into a public company founder, what he learned from the highs of an IPO, how the Colorado startup community shaped his journey to success, and what he's aiming to build next. Isaac Saldana, welcome to Outsider Inc.
Thank you, Ian, for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here, Isaac. It's a real treat to have you here with us. I've been following your story for years, so this is a lot of fun for me. I'd like to begin with something that struck me as I learned more about you and your story. You've described that the biggest engineering problem you faced was not a technical one, but instead the personal transformation from being this introverted engineer to stepping into the role of a CEO. Many founders out there can relate to that tension. They're great at building product, feel comfortable writing code, but are far less comfortable being the public face of a company or even managing people. So for some, it's so much of a tension that it prevents them from actually stepping into the role of founder at all. I'd love to hear your perspective on that challenge more broadly. What do you see as the biggest hurdles for technical introverts to cross that chasm and thrive as founders and CEOs?
The biggest transition for me was to go from this technical person. I work from home all the time. I feel way more comfortable with English now than Spanish, but at that time, I felt way more comfortable with Spanish. And so you have this introvert person that also has limitations on the language, and it's just much harder. For example, I couldn't pronounce the word deliverability. And so that's kind of what we sold at SendGrid. It's like email deliverability. And I just was in front of the mirror saying that word for about 1 month every day, multiple times per day, until it just somehow was able to pronounce it. At that time, I was working from home, and so I didn't talk to people too much. It was just straight technical for years, working from home. And then suddenly you have something that works and you have to sell it. And it was so hard making that transition. When I went to Techstars, it hit me that someone had to do the selling. Like, I felt very comfortable doing the technical things. There were 3 technical co-founders in total. And I was the one that had to do the selling. And I just had an option. Now, if I would have had the option, I wouldn't have done it. We launched in August 2009. In November, a few months later, I was completely out of money. And that was the first time I had to borrow money to pay rent. That tells you how much I had to sell it. I had no option. Otherwise, I was not going to pay rent. And at that time, I had 2 kids and I was married. And that was the motivation for me to start learning. Now, I still stutter a lot. It's somewhat challenging to express myself, but when there is passion on what you do, it somehow magically comes out. For the founders that are struggling to do this, I took a training called Decker. They have two exercises. One exercise, they tell you to talk about the stuff that you like, so technology, and they video you. And they did that to me. And I'm like very passionate about like all this email stuff, and it comes across very nicely. But then they give you this random topic to talk about. And oh my gosh, I struggled so bad. I started stuttering, I started moving. And so there are some things that over time, with some practice, you can control. I just want to acknowledge how hard it is.
I get that. And hopefully most founders don't have that pressure of literally we're out of money and I have mouths to feed. But that's good advice. I think in general, that's just what it takes to be a leader, is leaning into those areas of weakness and just practicing and doing it until it feels like second nature. You touched on a number of things that I definitely want to dive into in a moment, but I'd like to go back to the very beginning if we could. As I mentioned before, you were born in the US to a working class family. Around age 5, you moved to Mexico and then returned to Southern California at age 14, and you didn't really speak English very well at that time. By age 19, you were already married. You started a family. You were working 2 jobs and putting yourself through school full time. That's nowhere near what a typical tech founder is facing in terms of the challenges. I think it certainly earns you this outsider badge that we're focused on. But more specifically, that's just a lot more responsibility to carry than most college students will. Could you take us back to that time, having so much of that on your plate? How do you feel like that shaped your mindset, both as a person and as someone who would become an entrepreneur?
I think it influenced quite a bit. I was going to school full time. I had 2 jobs, had to be a dad and a husband and a family. And for the people that are married and have kids, they understand how hard it is to run a family. I know it brings a lot of happiness, but ultimately it's still very hard and it just doesn't get easy. There's no economies of scale. And so what I traded at that time is health and sleep. And so I did not sleep too well. I was 180 pounds. I'm 5'6". And so 180 pounds, it's not good. And so I traded that for time. And so I had to get it from somewhere. And that was like, eat whatever you can as fast as possible and try not to sleep. And so what that did to me is that when it was time to do a startup, it was more like, oh, I got this. It's not as hard as when I was 19. That time when I was in college, it just gave me so much work ethic that now it just feels that it's much easier compared to that time.
Speaking of challenges at that time, I know you were sort of figuring out what you were interested in. A high school counselor suggested that you study computer science because you liked math, and that was something that was offered at UC Riverside, but you found it challenging. It was difficult to perform in some of those classes, but it sparked a genuine passion for you in coding. How do you feel like that experience affected your sense of identity from being a kid who was just growing up and trying to get through life, a lot of responsibility, to someone who found this joy in building something that was difficult?
I went to a counselor in high school and she mentioned to me that, well, you're good in math, so you should go into engineering. And I'm like, okay, well, what kind of engineering? And I think she mentioned, it's like, oh, computers are like this new thing. And this is 1997. I did not apply to many universities because the time that I was at Mexico, if you go to a university, then that's a big win for everyone. Now, I did not realize like the reputation associated with universities here in the US. So I applied to the closest university that was UC Riverside. UC Riverside at that time did not have a computer engineering degree. And so I just chose something that had computer, and it was computer science. The first quarter, I got a B- in the first computer science class. And that made me realize how much I didn't know about computer science and how to think that way. And for me, getting a B-, it was like this big shock. I was getting very good grades in high school. And so that was the trigger point for me to go to the library, specifically Palm Desert Library. They did not have many programming books. So I just picked anything and it was like basic. And I started developing whatever I could. And so the following quarter, I got the highest grade on that class because I was on a mission to start learning this thing. I feel so lucky and grateful. It just happened randomly by luck that I picked computer science, and I just became very good at it. And not only that, but I also got a job at UC Riverside. And by the time I graduated, I already had way more experience than my peers. So that gave me some sense of humility because I cannot say I was very smart to design this.
I feel like when we're living in alignment, the right things have a way of finding us. I know you were sort of on the path to graduating, sticking with a stable job, but a friend of yours actually gave you a copy of an important book that really changed your life, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It shifted how you thought about your future and what you wanted to build for yourself. What was it about that book that connected with you so deeply and led to your entrepreneurial spark?
My friend that recommended that book, his name is Elmer Thomas. And at that time, it was my senior year. I was getting ready to explore what was next. And so I read that book and I just realized that I had never thought that way. It was always about finding a secure job and the highest paying job you could find. And I realized that there was this new thing that I should consider, and that was essentially building wealth and creating businesses and investing in real estate and stocks. I didn't do any of that, but I did focus on creating businesses. And so the day after I finished reading that book, I got together with Elmer Thomas and we started creating our corporation to create businesses, specifically in the tech industry. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial career.
We'll get to SendGrid in a minute, massive success, but along the way, there were some non-successes, right? I think one was a website generator and something was like a services marketplace similar to Thumbtack. You had some success in those. Ultimately, they didn't work out. But I guess just in those early entrepreneurial experiences, what did you learn from them? And how do you feel like those experiences shaped how you were going to be a better entrepreneur the next time?
The first business was this website generator that is similar to WordPress at this point. It's like at that point, websites cost about $1,000 per page for a person to do this static HTML page. And so the average number of pages was 5 for a business. And so they would pay about $5,000. We thought we could create software to generate those and have the customers essentially customize their own websites and then just pay us $10 per month. But at that time, we didn't know how to market it. And we thought that if we had more resources, we were going to be able to advertise the business better. We could never get funding. And so we closed the business. And so the next business we created was the one similar to Thumbtack, where we wanted to connect service providers with people looking for those services and bid for the best price. And the customer would choose based on price and ratings of the service provider who to pick. We raised $1 million and we try to spend it a lot on marketing, but we sometimes sponsor conferences at car shows and like these weird things. We bought ads on newspapers. And so like by now don't make sense. I still think that both were very good ideas and they were pre-Thumbtack, pre-WordPress. I didn't know what I needed at that time. And so when I found out about Techstars, I realized that it was a mentorship-driven program. And I'm like, oh, that's probably what I need. In addition to the team, the idea and resources, I need someone that can help me ask the questions that I don't even know to ask. And I think it worked.
Techstars was, especially at that time, solving this huge gap in knowledge. Shifting gears to SendGrid, I know you began writing the first lines of code in late 2008. You were still in Southern California, starting the company near Palm Springs. You mentioned you had 2 co-founders who were both technical, Tim and Jose. I know that you participated in Techstars the following summer in Boulder, ultimately moving the company there. But before we get into that whole experience, what were those early days like? Maybe these are all connected, the beginning days in 2008 and Techstars culminating in what actually SendGrid really was. But what was the problem you discovered? Why did you care so much about it? How did you kind of get going with your co-founders and with this decision to go ultimately to Colorado?
In these startups that I did, I faced the problem of email deliverability. And that was when someone would come into our website, they would sign up and we needed to send an email confirmation to just verify they own the email address. And these emails were landing on the spam folder. As CTO, I had to solve those problems. The more I looked into solutions, I could only find email marketing solutions. And these email marketing solutions were very, very expensive. I became passionate about that problem. I started writing things for the email server to solve these problems. And the solutions that I developed were terrible and they didn't work. And because of that, it just made me more attracted to those problems. And so I reached out to the co-founders and they were interested in continuing. And once we had the team, it was time to apply to Techstars.
You got into Techstars. Why do you think they took you? And what was that experience like?
I remember meeting David Cohen at the LAX. And I don't think he was too impressed. I was like this person that had no experience talking to business people. Luckily, David was technical, and so we could communicate in technical terms. But like, I think he probably realized right away all the things that I needed help with in that conversation. So we got in and we named the company SMTP API. And I'm still this technical person. I have this opportunity to create a company. I wanted to create this massive company. Like I wanted to build a whole platform on top of email. One thing that we realized during Techstars was that this massive platform no one's going to be able to understand. And we decided to focus on only a single problem that even started this idea of a platform, and that was email deliverability. And to our surprise, that was a massive problem. I thought it was just we were going to be able to make $10,000 a month and then we'll be set. But it just happened that at that time, the cloud was growing. This is 2009. In 2006, Amazon had launched Amazon EC2 and SQS, and the cloud was beginning to take shape. And with those resources, there were a lot of spammers taking advantage of that. And so because there were a lot of spammers, then that created a problem for the legitimate senders. That's the problem that we started solving. And so initially, they helped us just focus on that problem and figuring out pricing. The Techstars experience for us was that we were connected to mentors. They don't have a template for every team. Each team is different. And so if you don't have a technical team, you may connect with technical mentors. Or if you have a strong technical team, you can connect with non-technical mentors. And so we ended up connecting with non-technical mentors because that's kind of where we needed the most help. Focus, marketing, positioning, and pricing was one of the things that Techstars helped us tremendously with. Some of the advice was to start very high because marketing companies charge probably 10 times, 20 times more than our pricing. And so the argument was, hey, you should be able to charge more. And we could charge more, but it just didn't feel right. It still gave us room to put our own spin to the advice. And so we decided to adopt certain prices, and somehow they're the standard now. They're still the standard.
You hit on a lot of things that are really good about mentorship, accelerator, however it comes. A lot of times founders don't realize how important it is to have that narrow focus in the beginning. Pricing is more art than science. So always feel like the best way is to talk to folks who have seen more of it, but then ultimately there isn't one answer. So you've just got to experiment and iterate in the market. Obviously, you ended up landing on something that was a really painful and really big problem. Right after demo day, you raised $750K in seed funding. The company was out of money. You hinted at that before. You needed to sell. Then things kind of flipped to this situation of abundance. You had an unsolicited acquisition offer for millions of dollars. Term sheet comes in for $5 million Series A, led by Foundry, this elite firm. That's an extraordinary swing of events, right? From being in the LAX airport, feeling like you're not making sense, to getting into Techstars, to tapping into this problem, almost running out of money, then being very adequately capitalized. Take us back to that period where you're navigating these choices about, should I sell the company now? Should I take this term sheet and go for the moon and stars? What was that like for you?
I'm going to tell a story that happened in November to provide context. In the previous businesses that I created, I was on the hook for this loan. I was banking with Wells Fargo. And so they called me in November and said, hey, we need to work out a payment plan for this loan since you closed this business. I think it was like $300 a month. That was kind of the agreement. We raised money in November. And I called my wife and said, hey, yes, you could actually now go to the store and pay rent because I got my first paycheck after we raised the $750. I deposited the check and Wells Fargo decides to take the whole check and they forgot about the payment plan. And that's why I had to borrow money in November. I mean, I had nothing. I remember one of the investors, I told him the story and I was in Boulder at that time and he let me use $20 to put gas in my car to go back home. I eventually paid the loan. By March, we get this unsolicited term sheet from Foundry. After that was known, a company gave us also an unsolicited acquisition offer. Going from zero and having to borrow money to being able to be a millionaire in 4 months, it's crazy. I still remember the help from the board at that time. Mark Sullivan and David Cohen were on the board. And I remember Mark telling me, hey, Isaac, we'll support you guys. But the probability that you would get acquisition offers in the future is high, given that you're already getting acquisition offers. He gave me a lot of advice, but I still remember just that piece of advice because that was what changed my mind. I'm like, yeah, we're on a mission. This thing is probably bigger than us at this point, and I'm still passionate about emails. And so that helped me pass on being a millionaire and take the funding route. And so we took the term sheet and went back at it again.
What was it about what he said that made you want to keep going?
I felt that they actually wanted what's best for me. I used to end emails with like, thanks in advance. I would do the past tense when I would say thank you. And then David would correct me. And it's like, hey, Isaac, you say it this way. And it's very easy to not say things and it's harder to say the right things. And so it just gave me more confidence. As an entrepreneur and founder, we always question ourselves. Even till this day, I kind of question the stuff that I'm doing. And so sometimes you need those peers that will tell you when to start, when to stop, and when to continue going. And so I felt that from the board and I was right.
You touched on so many important things there, surrounding yourself with people who do have your best interests at heart, people who you trust, but then ultimately trusting yourself to make that right decision. It goes without saying that all of you were right with that decision. So well done. Speaking of making difficult decisions, you're off and running, kept the company going, raised the Series A. In between the Series A and the Series B, you made another pivotal decision, which was to replace yourself as CEO. You brought in Jim Franklin, a local entrepreneur in Colorado. Not a super common step for a Series A CEO to make willingly. What led you to that decision?
When we started, we raised our seed round from Highway 12. One of the things that I told the board is that obviously I didn't have experience. And so I was looking for a COO to help me run the business. I started recruiting for CEOs very, very early on. But imagine going to a very experienced COO candidate and saying, hey, awesome COO candidate, work for me. I don't have anything to teach you. You're just going to teach me and hopefully we'll make it. And so I wasn't like this very inspiring CEO or founder. So I could never recruit a COO for like a year and a half. At the end of 2010, we got together with the board and we decided that it was best to swap the title from COO to CEO. And then after that, I started getting amazing candidates willing to lead SendGrid. And so what was great about that recruitment process is that these candidates were open to working with me for months for nothing in return, just to get a shot at running SendGrid. And so I worked with Jim months prior, and then I would invite him to like meetings and stuff like that. And then by March 2011, that's kind of when we made the decision. Yeah, Jim is the person. And Jim, even before joining SendGrid, he's like, hey, I want to join a company that had these four values. And there were the four H's, and these four H's became the SendGrid values: happy, humble, hungry, and honest. Before Jim joined, we had 10 values, and I don't even remember most of them. And so immediately I started learning from Jim. For me, it was more like, I can have someone grow this thing that I have a lot of invested interest in, and I get to learn from awesome people. It's like, sign me up.
Well, it's an incredible insight. It's a very rare level of humility in a founder to think that way. It sounds like by the time you actually made the move, it was a pretty easy one for you because you had the opportunity to work with Jim. What would you say was the impact of that decision? How did Jim, over the course of the company, how did he change SendGrid?
Well, I think by that time we were growing fast, and we had still the $5 million that we had raised. And this is like a year later. I think we were cash flow positive or very close to that. So we weren't spending that much money. As CEO, I was very, very uncomfortable spending money. Very uncomfortable. So I was preventing the company from growing. Like, me sponsoring the conference was tough. It's like, hey, you have to pay $10,000 here. It's like, oh, it just took me so much to make $10,000. And we were accelerating growth too. So like, helping to set up the culture was like one of the biggest things that Jim did. And so even before I start a company now, the first thing I do, it's set up the values, because I know how much difference it makes. People tell me that SendGrid has been one of the best places they've ever worked. And I think a lot of it has been attributed to the foundation that Jim set up.
Wow. That's an incredible testament. Ultimately, these are people businesses, right? And so in order to scale the business, you got to scale the people. You hinted at how fast the company was growing. You caught lightning in a bottle. It was one of those businesses, and you laid the infrastructure for it to grow sustainably. Within a few years, you'd grown to hundreds of employees, billions of emails sent every month. By 2017, the company went public on the New York Stock Exchange. Very few founders ever get to ring that bell. Can you take us back to that moment? What did that feel like? What did that mean to you personally to see this idea of yours, SMTP API, make it all the way to an IPO and ringing that bell?
So one of the things that we did is that we took all the employees that had been with us for 5 years or more, between 50 and 100. And so once we rang that bell, I was able to look down and see these people. And I'm like, they believe in the dream. And this is the ritual for that dream to convert into something material. And that was so special. There were these people that, despite their personal challenges, they showed up. And that was what I remember the most, is ringing that bell, everyone cheering, and just knowing that dream turned into something material. That was very, very special.
It sounds like it meant a lot to you, that it meant a lot to so many people. Of course, company went public in 2017. I know you stepped away the next year. And then less than a year after that, Twilio came in, acquired the company for $2 billion, which is also an amazing step up from the IPO that had happened a short time before. It's an incredible sort of conclusion to the SendGrid story, which is one of the defining stories of Colorado's now booming startup scene. It's one of the few companies that has gone public since at least the .com era. You've been very vocal and supportive of both the Techstars and the Boulder, Denver startup community and how they contributed to your success. What do you think makes the ecosystem in Colorado so distinct? And what have you taken from that and carried forward in your current work?
I moved to Colorado for SendGrid in 2009. I mean, I was so close to Techstars that, to me, I associated Colorado with Techstars. And at some point, we could not hire fast enough in Boulder, and we moved to Denver. And I think we just kind of started blending with the whole ecosystem. And so that's kind of when I started seeing that Colorado wasn't just Techstars. It was actually the community just coming together. It was just people meeting with each other, trying to help each other, and also willing to provide mentorship. And I think that's something that I see a lot in Colorado, and that's the give first mentality. You just help, not expecting anything in return. And somehow, after some time, it just comes back 2x, 10x, 20x. It's not very specific when it comes back, but it always comes back. And so I would define the Colorado ecosystem as that.
I believe the startup community reflects the broader community in Colorado. People are generally helpful and open and have a love of place, which is really what's required. So shifting gears, Post-SendGrid, I know you didn't ride off into the sunset. You rolled up your sleeves and were ready for your next challenge. You created an innovation platform called Joy Labs with the notion of launching new companies in the communications infrastructure domain. So tell us a little bit about that, leaving the company that you spent a decade building and then diving right into building new ones.
Joy Labs was essentially this company that would help entrepreneurs create other companies. And I didn't know what that was called. But after working with Techstars, I knew it was called a startup studio. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to help entrepreneurs. I wanted to do some investing and just kind of explore what was next for me. And so I did that for a few years. I realized that I'm a terrible investor. And so I don't invest anymore. It's so hard. I thought it was just like, just give money to people and things will come back. And I mean, it's not as easy as that. And so I have huge respect and admiration for the VCs and investors that know how to do it right. I'm not one of those. And so in doing so and helping a few entrepreneurs, I ran into an idea that I fell in love with, and that was Memo. Memo, we developed for about 3 years and we never launched. I just never liked the solution to the problem. I plan on coming back to the problem at some point, but I feel that the world is very well physically connected, not logically. And so at some point, I want to come back and solve that problem. But in developing this problem, I started exploring email again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, email has not changed since SendGrid. And it's like more than 15 years, and the industry's just still using concepts that I introduced a long time ago. And now with AI, there's more resources to change how email works. And so I launched a company called Laneful. And so Laneful offers communication lanes that are monitored by AI agents. So they'll tell you if there's some issue with that lane and how to solve it. And so the first lane type that we introduced is email, because I know email quite a bit. And so right now you have email deliverability agents. You have to pay like $70K a year for someone to do that. And so now you get it for free. And then the cost of sending email, I'm planning on running it to zero. Right now, it's like some people have saved 60 times the amount that they pay existing. Some that pay millions to these platforms, they have saved over 50%. And so my plan is for that, not to have too much of a business on sending email, but actually making email better. I hate email, and I think most people hate it, but we still use it because we need it. And so I'm planning on introducing new technology on top of email so that it doesn't suck that much. We focus a lot on the ROI of this email deliverability thing, but a big learning experience in my time at SendGrid was that I wish I would have convinced the company to allocate resources to make email better. We were just focusing on the email deliverability aspect. We never focused on making email better. Unlike companies like Google, for example, they have been the catalyst to introduce HTTP2 and then HTTP3 in the Chrome browser. And then at some point they became standards. I wish I would have done more of that. And so now I'm on a mission to do that this time with Laneful.
Awesome. How's it going? Where are you on that journey?
We just launched last month. So we're just brand new and we are doing very, very well. We're still integrating big partners. And so that takes time, but at least some partners are open to saving millions of dollars. And so that in itself feels very good, just to be able to provide more cash to businesses so they can do more investment on AI or whatever they want to invest or extract profits from their business. That's very rewarding. And so I think we're just going to focus on that for the next year or so. But in the meantime, expect some net new technology from us on top of email that will make email much better. It's not hard to know what email needs if you compare it with other communication platforms. And so this is kind of what we're trying to do. Bring the good things from other communication platforms on top of email and still keep the awesome things that email has, like being completely decentralized and distributed. And so anyone can have their own version and stuff like that. I think that's a good thing for email. And I realized that it's not going away. I thought that by the time I came back, it was going to go away. And now it's like as strong as ever. So
it's amazing. These problems that have been fixed for years are still not fully fixed. And so plenty of opportunity. Just kind of closing note on you as the CEO. How would you compare where you are today on the journey, having had the benefit of being at SendGrid now as the CEO of Laneful? What do you think you're better at this time around?
I think I'm much better at projecting confidence. I've been talking to some companies and I feel very confident telling them the likelihood that your team is going to be able to do it better than me is very low. And so for me, saying that when I started was so hard because humility is one of our values. But I think it's important to recognize that confidence and humility, you need to learn how to manage that. And so I feel very confident now. It may not happen from the stuff that I develop, but I know that I will create some trigger points for people to start looking into making email better. And I know it will happen. This is the difference. Whereas before I was hoping that it would work. Now I'm like, okay, I'm just patient enough, but it has to work. I just don't know how long it's going to take because changes involve people and then people need time to know or realize when something's better. But I'm prepared for that now.
This is a really important point about confidence. You have humility, but the truth is you can do it better than that customer you were talking about. So if you don't share it in that way, you're not actually helping the customer. Are you more confident because you've had that success? And for founders who maybe haven't had success, what might be some tips for them to just break through being overly humble? We know that there's plenty of people who are overly confident in this industry, but enough attention doesn't get paid to people who are actually underconfident, that are very competent, that do understand, but they feel like they've never been in that position of having to project that strength. What might be some tips that you would suggest for people who don't have the success of an IPO to stand on when they're in these boardrooms and having these discussions with customers?
I think humility and confidence, they complement each other very, very nicely. Somehow, someone else needs to know that you know whatever you're talking about. But humility helps you make that even stronger by saying, I don't know, but I'm going to run some experiments and I'm going to figure it out. Or I'm going to figure out that it's not doable and that we can't do it. And so that on itself even creates more confidence. There are many things on email that I may not know, but I'm very transparent. And that helps me. And I'm like, I create even more trust with the customers. And so it's very important to let them know what you know and what you don't know. And what you don't know, explain how you're going to figure it out. It comes down to trust when someone's giving you money. And so it's no different than when you're talking to customers. It's like you have to sometimes talk about your motivations, why you're doing this, your skills, your intent. That's important when founders talk. You have to let them know what you know and what you don't know.
Sticking with this thread of leadership, you've talked about your leadership as not one of promoting yourself, but really about promoting ideas and promoting your company. And when the answers aren't obvious, you don't know what to do, that you will lean into your values. When you talk with founders today, what do you emphasize as the overlooked qualities of leadership?
I think everyone has to develop their own style. And I think a fundamental thing for anyone is their values. And once you set up your values, everyone can measure anyone in that company or like compare their behavior to those values. They're essentially a compass to your direction. And sometimes, many times, you don't know when you're faced with something that is not right or wrong, or that you don't know if it's going to be right or wrong. You go to your values and your values actually help you make decisions. For founders that have not set up their values, I strongly recommend that. I learned it from Jim. And for me, it's the first thing that I do when I create companies. Those values will also shape the kind of leader that you are. And at some point, there is strategy of execution. So you have the strategy of the company, but then also how are you going to execute against that vision? And on those, then your values also help with that.
You know, you said earlier that you didn't feel like you were a good investor, but a big part of early investing is about identifying founders who not just have talent or an insight, but have the mental fortitude to build a company, who have that grit and determination. You've experienced a lot of highs and lows, right? From scaling to an IPO, shutting down companies, and managing a lot while having a family at a very young age. What do you think separates those founders who are anti-fragile, I guess is the term? They grow stronger through setbacks versus those who might be derailed easily. And maybe what have you learned about balancing ambition on the one hand and having a family that actually works on the other?
I associate success now with luck. Also, the environment, the idea, many things are variables into that. What I do think, though, is that founders get much, much, much better over time. And so if founders consider themselves entrepreneurs, no different than a professional athlete would consider himself or herself as a professional athlete, then setbacks are just part of the process, right? So like sometimes if you're a basketball player, if you don't make a basket, then what do you do? Well, you just try to play the game longer so that you can make more baskets. And so I think founders should associate themselves as being founders, and that's their profession, and be okay with failing because that's just part of the process. I've seen very, very smart people with funding not succeed. We see that all the time with even very experienced founders. It doesn't define who you are, the outcome. So we have to be humble enough that also there is some luck involved, but we do get better over time. We get better with finances, with managing people, with managing health, managing family. One of their values at Joy Labs is you. They spell out happy, humility, adaptability, peers, passion, and you. And you, it's because the company can only provide so much, but if you're not sleeping, if you're not exercising, you're not taking the time to take care of mental issues or like physical issues, it's still your responsibility. And so you for us means there's a balance between what you do and what the company does. So I think if founders have that grit and resilience to not just look at one idea, but look at the rest of their career, they're just unstoppable. But it's very hard to look that far. Why? Because we need to pay our rent at the end of the month. And we have a lot of distractions, right? But I feel that at some point, given enough hands in the game, many entrepreneurs would make it.
We've used the term co-founder a lot. And one of the things about starting a family so young for you is it made work-life balance a necessity, not just a platitude. And I love how you said it before, but it's that your spouse is always your co-founder. And the older I get, the more I realize how true that is. So for founders listening who are in the thick of trying to balance ambition with family, what has worked for you? How have you been able to integrate those two things in theory and in practice?
It's very similar to when you talk to a customer and we're talking about trust and stuff. There are times where we both make good decisions and bad decisions. And so, for example, prior to start SendGrid, I wanted to join a startup, and there was a startup that looked very cool, and they would pay me a little bit less than I was making, and they would have to move to Santa Monica, where it's way more expensive than Riverside. And my wife's like, "Ooh, it doesn't sound like a good deal. You're going to be making less. They're going to pay more rent." And so I passed on that. This is back in 2002, 2003, around there. In 2009, there it was becoming more popular. So my wife knew kind of what that startup was, and it was Google. Would have done very good. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to trust you with this SendGrid thing because it looks like you know what you're doing. And so it gave me some type of credibility with my wife years later. And then now she still provides me feedback after work. I work with my wife and my kids. They give me just energy and like all this motivation to continue going. It's the fuel to power for the next day. And so finding that balance is tough. And sometimes you make sacrifices, but sacrifice and love they go hand in hand. And so I do think that the family sometimes sacrifices for you and vice versa. And that's when magic happens. So I would recommend to be completely transparent with your significant other, and because sometimes they have the right motivation. And so ultimately for us, it ended up being better that I didn't continue exploring the Google route, and that I got the credibility enough to start SendGrid years later.
Sometimes some parts of the family need more attention than the others, as long as over the long haul, it more or less balances out. And also that you're aligned on the same mission and communicative. I've heard a lot of founder stories, and the deeper I dug in on yours, the more I realize, it is a really unique one. There are so many things about you that are different. A constant for you has been balancing resources, relationships, knowledge, and happiness when making decisions. That clarity of thought has guided you through some incredible chapters. I feel like at many opportunities, you have chosen what's best for the whole. You've taken a very low ego, but high confidence approach to building business, which also feels very unique. Those are the things that stand out to me. What is it that you hope that people will take away from your story and your example of leadership?
The reason why I continue doing startups is because they just give me so much purpose, and purpose leads to happiness. It's funny that you mentioned that framework that I use. It's a quadrant of happiness, relationship, knowledge, resources. And I try to find the balance between those. And I think for me, kind of like values, that framework has helped in making decisions at a personal level. There are different people that have different things that work for them. I'm an engineer, and so I like frameworks. I ended up going to school much later. Oh, fun story. I went to business school after the IPO to learn more from the academic level and learn more of these frameworks and stuff like that. And they're very helpful. I do consider values as a framework. If you trust those values, then whatever the outcome is, you follow the right path, and a happy path.
Well, I think you could be teaching classes in the MBA programs. And as you were giving that answer, one of the things I was thinking about is that I feel like you could really be coaching founders on how to set culture for an organization. It's not just about stating values. It's about making sure that you're living them, because people follow what you do, not what you say. Look, it's a great way to end. We're about out of time, but before I let you go, we like to finish with a short segment called Beyond the Bio. These are just some really quick answer questions that let us step away from your resume and your career a little bit and dig into you.
That sounds awesome.
Okay. What's a quick piece of advice from a mentor that stuck with you throughout your journey?
Mark Sullivan's. It's like, if you get an acquisition offer this early, you're probably going to get more. And it made a huge difference, obviously, for us. I still can't believe he said that, and I would never say it. I mean, it's insane, but it helped me so much. And so credit to Mark for telling me that.
Well, what's interesting is that we are 15 episodes into this show, and I think you're the second person to bring a Mark Solon quote into this. The first was Jason Seitz, who said, when Mark was talking about relationships, it's quantity, not quality. Right? That you need to spend time with people to build deep bonds. It's not just about the highs, it's about the mundane. And that's really where relationships are forged. Who's an unsung hero in your life, and what has been the impact they've had on you?
Oh, my wife, by far. We've been together for over 26 years. To say my life and her life, I think I just see it as one. And that's how deeply I'm connected with her. That brings me a lot of balance. It's funny how the phase of companies is the entrepreneur, but there's so much behind it. And so my wife should start also doing some conferences and podcasts, because we're one.
That's beautiful. Who's someone in your local startup community or your broader network who does not get enough credit? Someone who contributes a lot behind the scenes and deserves a shout out from you?
King Kim, he wrote code prior to the founders at SendGrid. He now works with me and is probably one of the smartest technical people, the most kind, but I never seen anyone invite him to a conference. He's always getting impressive things done. And so a lot of the innovation that happened at SendGrid, he was part of, and now at Laneful, he's continuing that, and he lives very close to me. So for any founders that know Kane or want some technical advice and from someone that is very quiet, is that person.
Yeah, a quiet doer. Tell us something most people don't know about you outside of work. A hobby, a travel spot, a guilty pleasure, or maybe even a hidden talent.
I'm into health quite a bit. I'm 46 and I feel at my prime. And before 2021, I thought that in your 40s is kind of when you start preparing to get old. I never thought that in my 40s, I was going to feel not a little bit, but way, way stronger than in my 20s or 30s. I have a very rigorous diet and workout exercise and like supplement and all that stuff outside work. And so if I'm not doing family stuff or company stuff, I'm doing some health stuff.
What are one or two songs that you'd like to add to our Spotify Founders playlist? Something that fuels your workday or maybe has inspired you on your journey as an entrepreneur?
I listen to hip hop, heavy metal, and classical music. 2001, 2002, that's kind of when I was getting ready to start exploring more things. And so I would code quite a bit. And then Dr. Dre released one album. I don't remember in 2001 what it was
2001.
called. And so, it was 2001. Okay, cool. Yeah, I would do that. And or the Metallica album, Enter Sandman or something like that.
That's quite a range. I know we've already talked about a couple of books, but any other books you would recommend that have been valuable to you on your journey?
So many, but I would mention a few. Good to Great, Made to Stick, Speed of Trust, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Yeah, that's a good one. You are the culture guy. This is what I'm saying. You're a culture builder. Okay, last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's about to start their founder's journey, particularly someone who's an outsider like you, what would it be?
Become an entrepreneur for the rest of your life. And at some point, you'll play the game long enough and it'll increase your probabilities of success. And when you win, also be humble enough to understand that there was some luck involved.
Wow. That's a fantastic way to end. Isaac, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. I got a lot out of this conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will too. Can't wait to share it with them.
Thank you, Ian. It was a pleasure being here.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Outsider Inc. A big thank you to Isaac Saldana for joining us. What stayed with me most wasn't just the IPO. It was the growth that made it all possible. A non-native English speaker practicing deliverability in the mirror. An introvert learning to sell when his back was against the wall, and a selfless leader welcoming a new CEO when the company needed it. A relentless focus on culture is what got him there. You can see it in that New York Stock Exchange moment, looking down at teammates who believed from the beginning. Above all, Isaac reminds us that values aren't wall art, they're operating instructions. Confidence and humility can live side by side, and sometimes your most important co-founder is at home, keeping you grounded for the long game. If you want more from Outsider Inc., don't forget to subscribe to the platform at outsiderinc.substack.com. It's packed with highlights from today's episode and bonus insights you won't want to miss. You can follow Outsider Inc. on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Outsider Inc. Pod. You can also follow me on X at Ian Hathway. Outsider Inc. is produced by Spellbinder Media. We'll be back soon with another fascinating outsider conversation. Until then, thank you so much for listening. And remember, great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. See you next time.